I'm glad everybody's here. Good to see everybody this morning. This has been a great blessing already to be together, and it's been a great week. If you were here Wednesday night, we had a great opportunity to hear from Jacob, to have a fellowship meal together, to see the fireworks. It was a great turnout and great opportunity to be together. Little kids had sparklers. Only a couple of them burned themselves. Well, only one of them was mine. So we had a really good time. And then yesterday we had a wonderful work day. A ton of people came out and helped set it up for our Vacation Bible School. So if you were here yesterday, I want to thank you for coming and helping set up. We have a lot of great things planned. If you haven't signed up to volunteer for VBS and you want to help out and you want to use your gifts and your skills to bless the community and bless those kids, we'd love to use you. We have a lot of little kids registered and signed up. So we have a great group, and if you'd like to help, let me know, let Jacob know, and we'll get you plugged in somewhere. We're continuing this morning We're continuing this morning a conversation that we started last week where we looked at Jesus' disciples, those formal people who were called to come follow Jesus as a rabbi, what they meant, or what Jesus meant to them. And we're looking at two specific stories, one from John chapter 6, one from Mark chapter 10, of these disciples who chose to follow Jesus, and for one reason or another, they walked away and they left him. In John chapter 6, we have this story about Jesus. He feeds thousands of people. He does this incredible miracle, and then he talks of himself as being this bread of life. He uses this symbolic language of eat my flesh, and it's completely lost on the audience as they take him literally and they don't understand, and so they walk away. And Jesus ends up looking at his 12, those 12 special apostles. He ends up looking at them and saying, "Are you going to go too?" And then in Mark chapter 10, we have this wealthy young man who runs up to Jesus. He's enthusiastic. He's emphatic. He runs up to Jesus. He falls down at his feet. He calls him good teacher. And he says, "What must I do to have eternal life?" But he ends up walking away disheartened because Jesus is asking for more than this young man is willing to pay. Last week, we established that there's this kind of a continuum of discipleship. That on the one hand, you had people who were rejecting Jesus, who just outright did not want to follow him, did not want to hear what he had to say. And you had some people who were disoriented, and they were disillusioned, they were confused. You had people who were drawn and who were seeking Jesus. But then you had those who were all in, committed to follow him. And while Jesus doesn't reject any disciples, he's honest that it's not an easy road to follow. And it's not an easy decision to make. And we spent some good time focused on those who left. And why did they leave? Why did they choose to walk away? But this morning, we're going to focus on those who stayed. Those who were committed, those who were all in. They saw something that everybody else missed. In the presence of the same evidences as everyone else, they stayed put. And see, Jesus meant something unique that compelled commitment. And so this morning I want to look at that group, and I really want to answer these three real specific questions. Why did they stay? Why does that matter? And how can we do it too? Back in John chapter 6, you have the crowd that's following Jesus, and he's just done this miracle, right? And he's fed thousands of them. But the people are still looking for something more. They say, or Jesus says, that they are following simply because they had their fill of the food. But Jesus responds to him. He says, "Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has set his seal. This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent." Then the people ask for a sign. They ask for something more, and they bring up Moses, how for Israel in the wilderness, Moses gave them this sign. He gave them this bread from heaven, this manna in the wilderness. But Jesus says, "For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." And they say, the crowd says, "Yes, give us this bread." Jesus says, "I have this bread that's for eternal life for the world." And they're like, "Yes, give us that bread." And they miss the point. He explains that he is that bread of life. And whoever comes to him shall not hunger, and whoever believes in him shall never thirst. There's this relationship that Jesus explains to those who are following him between belief and life. And Jesus is trying to calibrate their search, and all the while they're fighting him on it. And they want something tangible. They want a physical bread that can feed their physical hunger. And he's telling them something that we can all understand, that it doesn't matter how much you eat, eventually you're going to be hungry again. On the 4th of July, I love watching this. It's the coolest sport I can think of is competitive eating, right? And this year, they do it every year on the 4th of July, the famous hot dog eating contest. And this year, if you missed it, it was a good one. Joey Chestnut won for the 11th time, and he set a record for eating 74 hot dogs. And that's just incredible. I don't know how anyone has 74 hot dogs worth of space available, but he eats 74 hot dogs. He set the record. But you can eat 74 hot dogs, and a day or two passes, got to be a day or two, and you're hungry again. And so this crowd comes to Jesus and they say, give us this food. And Jesus says, even if I did, it still wouldn't be satisfying, because it's just satisfying a passing need. Jesus tells the crowd that the food source might sustain your body, but it doesn't give you life. And Jesus offers life with himself as the source. He says, I give life to the world. He says to obtain life, you have to believe in him. He says this several times in John chapter 6. In verse 47, he says, truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes has eternal life, and I am the bread of life. Verses 63 and 64, it is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is no help at all. And the words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life, but there are still some of you who do not believe. Jesus is saying that he can give life in a way that nothing physical can, and no one can access this life without belief in him. And I think that's such a good message for us to swallow today. That nothing, I love the way Jesus says it. He says the flesh is no help at all. And it's sometimes for all of us, we rely on the physical things of this world to give us life. And while sometimes they may sustain our life, they aren't the source of life. Jesus says in verse 40, for this is the will of my Father, that everyone who looks on the Son and believes in him should have eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. And Peter says, after all the others have deserted, we looked at this last week, I love these words from Peter. After everyone's deserted, Peter says, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of life, and we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. And there's this relationship between belief and life, and Peter, at least for the moment, he gets that. He's committed, he's specific, and he understands that Jesus offers something that nothing else can. And the young man in Mark chapter 10, when he's seeking Jesus, he's seeking him for the same thing, right? He runs up to Jesus, he falls down, and what does he ask? He says, how can I have eternal life? That's what he runs up. And that's what he's looking for. These people who are drawn and interested in Jesus, those who stayed, they're looking for life because they understand that everything in this world is unsatisfying. This is the entire purpose of John's gospel. This is what John writes his whole gospel for. He says, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. To those who understood Jesus, he meant life. And Jesus says of himself that he came into this world so that people may have life and life to the full. It's John 10:10. not just sustenance for life, but actual life itself. Those who stayed knew a dissatisfaction in this life without Jesus, and they believed his claims that he could deliver what they longed for. But why does that matter so much? Why does it matter so much to have that life? You have to have belief in Jesus. Why is belief so pivotal? When Jesus calls his disciples, both then and now, he asks us for a level of belief, for a measure of faith. And he doesn't tell us where our lives will go when we follow him, right? I mean, when you commit to follow Jesus, he doesn't tell you where your life's going to go, and he doesn't tell you this is how you're going to change. This is how your life is going to change if we follow. He doesn't tell us those things, but he asks for belief that he is who he says he is. This affirmation of his identity as the Son of God, and that his intentions for our lives, his intentions are good. That not only do we believe that Jesus is who he says he is, but the work that he's doing in our lives are good. He asks, do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God and that he wants only good for your life? And that's the question that I think Jesus asks all of us. But that's not all that belief is it? See, in Peter's confession in John chapter 6, he says, we believe that you are the Son of God, and we have come to know it. It's an interesting distinction that Peter makes between, he separates belief and knowledge as two completely different things. And I think he says that because belief that doesn't alter your behavior is only knowledge. Does that make sense? Belief that doesn't change your behavior, that doesn't change your actions, it's just knowledge. Because you can know something without really believing it, and you can believe something without really knowing it. And belief is so crucial because our beliefs guide and propel our actions. I like the way that Donald Miller puts it. He says, believing in God is as much like falling in love as it is making a decision. Love is something that both happens to you and something you decide upon. He's saying that there's a part of belief that's involuntary. It's something like it's in your gut, right? That's why we say just follow your gut and follow your heart. There's this belief, it's in you, it's involuntary, and that can be very powerful. He says, but there's another half, and that's a conscious choice, and you stick to it. It's making a decision. So when Jesus asks people to believe in him, he's not only asking for a verbal confession of belief, but also that decision of belief shapes your actions as well. When Jesus asked the rich young ruler, when the rich young man comes to Jesus and requests life, what Jesus gets back to him, he's asking for his belief to guide his behavior. The rich man comes to Jesus and he says, I want this life. And Jesus says, if you really believe in me, I want to see it in your actions. But without belief, usually our behaviors don't change. And I think we miss out on that fullness of life that Jesus offers. Without belief, our behaviors don't change. This is why we usually don't change our diet unless we believe it will have a positive effect on our health. This is why we don't change our study habits or habits as students unless we believe it will change our grade, have some positive impact on our grade. That's why we don't change our work ethic unless we believe there's some sort of payoff. Our beliefs motivate our actions. So picture it this way: belief plus action equals life. When Jesus is trying to explain this to his disciples, he says, if you want the life, you have to have belief. And it's not just belief that's a confession out of your mouth, it's a belief that you can see in your behavior. So belief plus action equals life. That's why James says faith without works is dead. I try to think of a simple way to kind of explain this and picture it in my head. This is what I got. This is what kind of stuck with me. It's kind of like a rope swing over a lake or a river. You've done that. Maybe your kids have done that. Maybe you've done it before. That rope swing that goes over a lake or over a river versus a diving board. Now, these are two different ways of getting into the water. And they have two very different decision-making processes. See, for a lot of us, we're following Jesus like a rope swing. Man, we hold on tight. We get a good running start. But there at the point of decision, there's a built-in exit strategy. When we're at that point of making a decision and our belief in Jesus actually gets us to that point of action, if we don't like what we see when we get to that point, we can swing back and go back to solid ground. There's a built-in exit strategy. You can always bail out. And for some of us, we're just swinging over that water. Just swinging over that water, hanging right above the new life offered in Jesus while still holding on to the old life. Or, I think when we stand at the end of that diving board, you've seen kids do this. You stand at that diving board and there may be a little fear. And there may be a little uncertainty about what happens when you jump off. But once you jump, there's no going back. I got a great story. So one day I'm sitting on the back porch of our house, and sitting on the back porch. Everybody's gone, but they come back, and Boston comes out to the back porch to see me, and his chin, his lips, his nose, his forehead, just this bar of bloody scrapedness. Even his gums around his teeth, gums are bleeding. And he walks back in the backyard, and he's like, "Hey, Dad," like nothing's weird is going on. I'm like, "Buddy, what happened?" And his eyes are all red and puffy. So what happened? So they were out of the pool. And if you have a pool at your house and Boston's going to do something crazy, he just is. He always does. But they're at the pool and they're on the diving board, and he tries a backflip off the diving board, something he'd done many times before, and he didn't clear the board by just about that much, and just boom, 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 just right up. He ended up losing one of his teeth doing this. And sometimes it's like that. I mean, when you see this story in Mark chapter 10 of the rich young man, man, there is some pain. Jesus is asking for a price. He says, if you want to follow me, if you want this life, if you truly believe, how's it going to affect your actions? And he looks at this young man and he says, I want you to sell everything you have. I want you to give the money to the poor. I want you to come follow me. There may be pain in that transition. But once you jump, there's no going back. And we have that choice. If we want that life with Jesus, we got to jump in and we got to let go and go all in. So Jesus poses this kind of belief to his disciples. And at times it sounds extreme and it sounds radical with the language that he uses, right? He says, I want you to eat my flesh, drink my blood, abide in me and I in you. Sell everything you have and come follow me. He says, take up your cross daily and follow. But is he asking us to do all the work? Well, no. He's asking you to trust him enough to give us a better life than we can give ourselves. Man, I think that's a real simple way of explaining the life that the disciples saw in Jesus. That he could give them a better life than they could give themselves. This is why Peter says in Mark 10, see Jesus, we have left everything and followed you. But that's hard. That's hard. It's hard to understand Jesus and to approach Jesus and say, Jesus, I trust that you can give me a better life than I can give myself. So how do you do it? One of my favorite guys to listen to is a guy named Bob Goff. Bob Goff, he's a lawyer out in California. He wrote a book a few years ago. A lot of people read it. Maybe you read it. It's called Love Does. He read a new one earlier this year called Everybody Always. Everybody Always is going to be the guide for our class that meets in the library on Sunday mornings starting next week. So there's a little plug for that. But I got to hear Bob Goff speak at LCU a couple years ago, and I was just blown away by his stories and by the things he's done with his life, by his energy, his love for Christ, his love for love for Christ and his love for others. I've even called him a few times. I've called him on the phone and talked to him a few times. which sounds really impressive until you pick up one of his books and read his books. And you'll discover that on the last page, he puts his own personal cell phone number in the back of every one of the copies of his books. So what's actually impressive is that if you call him, he will answer and he'll talk to you for a while. So he must get a lot of calls, I guess, but really impressive, really neat guy. But Bob has this practice of quitting things. He says, I don't know why he picked Thursday, but he says every Thursday he quits something. That he wants to have this life that Jesus offers. And he says, but sometimes you got to quit something. We're going to watch a short video clip now, and this explains a little bit more of why Bob quits things. Let's watch that. Okay. There we go.
If we keep telling people that we're new creations, but everything's exactly the same, it's like that's deception, right? And there's nothing new about that. So what I'm trying to do is give the boot to one thing every Thursday. And you don't get to make suggestions for your loved ones. All right. Yeah, just for you. Just say, what's one thing that would make me change? And I would go for a little higher up on the tree than saying, I'm going to quit broccoli or something. Yeah. Just say and you can even let go of a hurt that you've had with somebody that just messed with your heart or your head, or just say, you know what, we're done. Because if I tried to figure out why I was going to forgive them, then I would just start thinking about why they ticked me off again. I'd probably hate them more. Yeah. But what's been helpful for me is I'm just not going to skip over the middle part about reliving on a loop, like what happened. Just say, hey, it's done. That was then, this is now, we're done. And the question is less on them, the focus is on me, and say, how could my heart be different? And I want to just change some circumstances to get there.
He says he quits something every Thursday. I don't know why Thursday. He says, because I want to become this person that Jesus has called me to. I want to have this life. He says, but if I never change from the old life, I never quit things of the old life, then I never have this new life. And he says, and sometimes we can be so focused on what everybody else is doing that I forget that I'm supposed to be growing and changing and doing something myself. So when we ask this question of how do we do it? How do we follow Jesus? The disciples that stayed with Jesus, they stuck around because they believed in him and they believed in this better life that he offered. And belief matters so much because beliefs propel our actions. And love, the way that Bob puts it, life, the way Bob puts it, and Christ calls us to change, to let the old creation go and let the new one come. But we can't be those all-in, committed disciples if we're still holding on to the rope. You got to jump in. So the easy way to do it, I love Bob's challenge, and that's kind of our challenge for all of us this morning, is that big changes, sometimes we look at ourselves and look at the old life that we had, or the old life that we have, and that new life offered in Jesus, and we say, that's a big change. And those are big changes, and that's scary. That can be intimidating to say, I got a lot to change. So I love the way Bob puts it, and that's our challenge for this week, is sometimes big changes happen in small increments, right? That big changes happen in small increments. And so I love this challenge of pick something meaningful to quit, to incrementally make those changes. It may be a habit or a behavior that you have. Maybe it's something that's on the heart level or in your mind, like he describes. But big changes happen incrementally. But that's okay, and that's why we have grace. That's why Jesus offers us grace to help us make those small steps towards life that's offered in Jesus. So my challenge for all of us this week is to quit something. Is to look at yourself and spend time in prayer about this. Spend time in conversation with one another, with people that you trust. What is it that's blocking you from having that life that Christ offers? What is it that's blocking me from having that life that Christ offers that I could quit? Maybe it's some small steps that we can make along the way. But that's what Jesus asks the rich young man in Mark chapter 10, right? He says, this is something that's blocking you from having life with me. And I want you to believe so much that it changes your behaviors. And are you willing to, do you trust him enough? Do you believe enough to quit something and to let go? So take some time this week asking for prayer and guidance to see what it is that's in your way. Ask some trusted friend to help you see what it is that's in your way that you could quit. Or maybe you see it clearly. If you see it clearly, then I ask that you pray for strength and patience and help, because letting go of that rope can be hard, and it doesn't always happen all at once. So may we be disciples that are full of belief, and may we be disciples that are full of life. And may we bear good fruit in others so that that life may spread and grow. Thank you so much for being here this morning. I hope our time together has been a blessing. Let's stand and sing.